There we go. Good morning, everyone. I'm Todd Cochran. Welcome to the new media show. No, actually, it's not. The way we start this show is Ask the Podcast Coach for February 17th, 2024.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music. That means it's Saturday morning. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from theschoolofpodcasting.com, and joining me right over there, it's not Jim Cullison. No, he's out on special assignment, and Dave forgot to move the camera because that's Rob Greenlee right there. And from the new video show. And let's see, you've got your show on YouTube, which is something like podcasting tips with friends or something of that nature.
Correct.
And then, are you still doing Truth? Well, not Truth. You have
the Trust Factor?
Trust Factor, and it began with a T.
Yeah, I haven't been doing as many episodes here as of late, just because there's been a lot of other stuff I've been working on. So I definitely want to keep it going. I will. It's the old plague of having too many podcasts and not enough time to do them.
That's it. Yeah, it's always a great idea, and then you're like I've finally come to the conclusion that I've tried, I think 5 times, and the last time I did it for about 2 months, to do a local podcast, which would be great if I lived in a town that I cared about. But there's just not much in Akron, Ohio, and I didn't want to really cover sports, and I kind of wanted to do local politics and then highlight like local businesses and stuff. And it's just come to my conclusion that I'm just not that jazzed about, I can't wait to talk about, whatever. And so I'm actually I have the domain Akron Podcast. I'm tempted to contact the city of Akron and just say, hey, how about you hire me to do your podcast? You provide the content, and I'll just assemble it, and we'll see what happens. But before we jump into questions, hello to the chat room, and we do have some sponsors. I don't know if you're aware of this, Rob, but the first one is, and this one's really cool. This is Mark over at Podcast Branding, and what I love about this is I just hired Mark to do yet another logo for me, or another piece of album artwork. If you're watching the video right now, you'll see where the School of Podcasting and Podcast Rodeo show, and I'm trying to, there you go. Rob's just big on the screen right now. Dave's making up things as he goes along. But the beauty of it is, I sent out to Mark, and he's like, hey, I'm not quite sure. Let's get together and figure out. He wants to understand the show so that the branding is in a line. So if you've ever hired anybody on Fiverr or something like that, they're not doing that. They're not going to sit down with you one-on-one and create great artwork like we have now. So I'm looking forward to it, and that's going to be for a show called Your Podcast Website. Speaking of starting new podcasts that you don't have time for, I hired Mark. That was kind of like when I sat about this idea, and I was like, I'm going to do this. And so I went out to Mark, and of course that website is podcastbranding.co. Wow. That's it. Because this is a big coffee theme.
Music branding too here that goes along with it too.
That's it. And our other sponsor is from Dan from Based on a True Story podcast. And the beauty of this, if you've ever seen a podcast or a movie especially that starts off with based on a true story, Dan goes in and finds out, how much of that is based and how much of it is not. And so right now he's looking at the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. That kind of fits in because we just did Valentine's Day, and Young Guns, and Greta Garbo, and Mata Hari. So, go check that out, and you can find out just how, I don't even know, somebody was trying to explain what, now you're on here twice. You just can't get enough, Rob.
I guess
that's
doubled up now.
Yeah.
So, right. Wow, you just blended me in with myself.
I did.
That
It
was
just
magical.
morphed. Because I know you're involved with Streamyard, and the beauty of Streamyard is, man, it's pretty powerful and it's pretty easy. And I, on a level of, in this case, I'm using Ecamm Live, it's got more bells and whistles, but if you're not super, I use this once a week, so I'm always a little rusty anyway when I do this stuff, and there are times, and then you do things like, oh, wait, I have a different co-host today, so I had to change all the names, and sometimes those things just, it's more fun, and, and then you do things that Rob's twice on the screen and things like that, so That's always fun.
Well, that's the thing with doing things live. I'm doing lots of live stuff these days, and it really helps to have a good tool to that you're familiar with and that you use all the time, and you have an understanding of what to expect and transitions and trying to pull people in and things like that. It can be complicated to create content plus manage the experience too. It's not easy.
Well, and the other fun thing is I am being screamed at by the chat room that we have an echo, and we kind of went through this last week, and now it will go away. Yes. Okay. Sorry about that, chat room. They were like,
is it gone now? Okay.
It is gone.
It's not coming from me, right?
No, it's what it is when I've been using Ecamm to make tutorials for the School of Podcasting. And if I want to play sound from my Mac into a, program that's recording the Mac, you have to do some twisting around, and silly me, I forgot to change it back. So that should be gone now. But we did. If you have a question, of course, you can throw it in the chat room, or if you want to jump in, just like it says above us, go to askthepodcastcoach.com/question. But I thought this was interesting. I saw this. I was in Reddit this morning and looking around, and it said, here, I want to record. So the question was, what simple equipment do I need to record a walk and talk podcast? And so this person said, I want to record while being on the phone with other people with good audio quality so that I can record all podcast episodes while going for walks with people instead of sitting in front of a computer. What's the simplest setup? And so there were a couple things there that kind of jumped out at me. A, I want a simple setup. B, I want good audio quality. C, I want to do this on my phone. And I politely said, we may have a conflict of interest here, because usually, good audio doesn't come while you're walking around. I've done that before. I did a weight loss show, and there on occasion I would just take a portable recorder and I record it with me. Sometimes I might get fancy and put on a lav, but you still have traffic. One of my favorite episodes, my audience loved it because I'm walking along and luckily there was a fence, but a giant dog came out of nowhere, and you just hear me go, yeah, because this giant doggy's coming at me. So I don't know. Do you run into a lot of people trying to make podcasts on a phone?
Well, I think that there is some technology out there that is enabling that to be possible more.
Yeah.
This noise reduction software there's a couple of different companies that are trying to do that, and I've been involved with a couple of them that have been trying to push their technology out, but I'm not sure that it's a seamless thing right now. I think if you're trying to record, that's kind of probably an easier model to use noise reduction software than using noise reduction software with like maybe a live program or something like that you're trying to do from your phone. I know even Streamyard has noise reduction capability built into the platform. So if you do it on your phone, which you can do, it will do a certain amount of noise reduction, but I don't know that it's at the state of the art of noise reduction. I've worked with a company called Nomono, which is another one, but it's kind of lavalier based, and you can walk around, but it's kind of a self-contained system that doesn't really involve your mobile phone. So, and then there's other platforms that are more software based. But I think the technology is getting better, Dave. I think being able to do this from your mobile phone and do it anywhere, I think is where a lot of these companies are trying to go towards is to enable people to have just more natural conversations, right?
Yeah.
And in all sorts of different kind of places, a coffee shop or a conference or out in nature or whatever, and have that technology help you out, right, with the audio quality side. So
Yeah.
I think we're definitely moving towards that.
So you can use StreamYard on your phone?
Yeah, you can.
Okay,
Yeah,
'cause-
it actually has an app right now on iOS
Oh, that's nice.
that enables you to bring in a guest. So a guest could use their mobile phone to call into your live show.
That's cool, because I know Riverside does it, and I think Squadcast does too, but I didn't realize StreamYard does. So again, the
That's new.
advantage, the cool thing about StreamYard is they do make things easy.
Yeah.
Daniel has a fun comment here. He said, I remember a guy who once contacted me wanting advice for how to podcast while fighting in an airsoft gun war, to which Daniel said maybe a headset, like you see some,
Right.
boy, that's, yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, people want to record in a lot of different situations. I've actually found using some of these technologies that, it creates a different experience for the recording of your podcast too. It does create more of a disarmed guest or a disarmed conversation where people aren't using like these kind of microphones, so they
yeah,
don't feel like they're on the radio or whatever. They just feel like they're just having a conversation with someone, and this technology kind of enables that kind of experience to happen. And it's quite a different mental experience because we're all like conditioned that if you're going to do a quality podcast, you got to use, a
right.
SM7B or something like that. And it's like, the technology is getting better, but
Yeah.
I don't
Well,
know that it's easy to get access to in all sorts of different situations. The Nomono device that I was talking about, I have it on the shelf behind me. The only problem with that is it's like $2,500, but it doesn't work with a mobile phone. So, yeah.
got it. Yeah. And then Craig says, I remember a question about a guy who wanted to podcast in a pub. That again is going to need some noise reduction probably by the time you're done. And
Right.
then Chris from Castahead says connecting on StreamYard via phone is seamless. I've had guests actually do that when their Wi-Fi was janky. I hate when things go janky, and their 5G
That's
phone
such a
was
cool
better.
word
It
too,
is a good
janky.
one. It's the word of
Yeah.
the day. So we'll just try to say the
I'm
magic
sure
word.
we'll find other janky things that we can talk
Oh,
about
there's
today,
there's
Dave.
always room for janky. Absolutely. It sounds like some sort of like show on Nickelodeon at night or something like tune in for the madcap adventures of
Right.
Janky. Janky and
Well,
friends.
hey, it sounds like a great name for a new podcast. Just call it The
Just
Janky
Janky.
Show.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I remember marketing over coffee with Chris Penn and another dude who I can't remember because this is long, and they did it literally in a coffee shop. And at
Yeah.
the time, it was really cool because it was so not radio. Remember back in the old days, we were
Yeah.
trying not to be radio, and you'd be sitting there, and all of a sudden they just start grinding beans, and they just have to talk over it while it's just going on in the background. But it was the whole time we're like, they're really in a coffee shop. This is
That's right.
marketing over
Hey,
coffee.
it's the
So
experience, Dave. It's like, it's
yeah,
that ambient sound, but
yeah,
like I did the the new media show live on stage at Podfest
yeah,
just a few weeks ago, and I used that Nomono device
yeah,
to lob everybody up,
yeah.
and I actually used the audio from that for the podcast, and it cleaned it up a lot. Because you imagine doing a
Oh,
live show on stage in the exhibition area, especially with, I mean, I'm sure you remember the booth that was right next to us
oh yeah,
was so loud, and it's those are challenging audio situations, and if you want to do more in real life type of recording situations, you kind of have to really think about that noise reduction stuff so you don't get really distracted by the background sound too much, and you can, as a listener, you can really focus in on the content.
yeah. Gary wins the prize. John Wall is the name I was trying to remember. John Wall and Christopher Penn. And they
Okay.
had a British one. It was John
John
Wool,
Wall.
and
John
Christopher
Wall.
Penn. Yeah, it's Numano. Is that the name of the device?
Yeah.
Yeah, that thing is some serious voodoo. And what I'm looking forward to is because I know right now maybe the average podcaster.
This is it right here.
Here we go. Hold on. We'll fix you up right. I'll do this, and then I will drag you over there, and presto. So yeah, it's just this little square thing, and it's
Right.
got a bunch of microphone receivers,
Yeah.
and
You just pop them out and put them on and push this big red button right here, and it starts recording.
yeah, and that's and then somehow it uploads it to the cloud,
Yeah,
removes the background
through
noise.
Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
And this base unit has 8 microphones around it.
Oh, that's right.
You Yeah, so it picks up all the ambient sound around you, and it uses that track in the software to filter out that ambient sound from the actual
Yeah.
recordings from the little lavalier mics.
Interesting.
So,
Yeah. Chris says I have a podcast client mattress store. The owners,
mhm.
mattress store owners, I see, and we record live in their store on purpose with a shotgun mic. The store ambience is actually part of the show and hardly ever distracts. There you go.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's I know when I've recorded at like different events, Podfest and Podcast Movement, and I'll just be in the hallway. And that's
yeah,
usually where I'll have some sort of microphone and I'll just announce, I'm here in the hallway at Podcast Movement. And people say, wow, I kind of felt like I was there. And
yeah.
as long as the background noise isn't louder
Is it
than the noise.
overwhelming the
Yeah,
audio, right? Where you can't really hear the conversation.
yeah,
I think that's the goal of it, because it is interesting to listen to audio that's recorded in the real world to some degree, as long as it's not too distracting. So,
yeah.
right.
I was listening to. It's like there's Kevin Schmidlin, which is Grow the Show, and then there's Deidre Shen, who has Grow Your Podcast, something with Grow from Cap Show, and she was
Mhm.
recording from Podfest, and it was interesting because she must have been at a table, and her co-hosts were doing a recap, and people kept coming up and just politely. I think she was calling them over, but it was just this whole thing where you just felt like they were in the hallway, and people would stop by, hop on mic for 3 seconds, give their recap, and then leave. So it's
Mhm.
it again. I kind of felt like I was there, and it's the theater of the mind, I guess, that kicks in a situation like that.
It is, and I think increasingly we're seeing shows being produced with the spatial audio concept to it
Yeah,
too, which actually gives you a perception of place, especially in like a dialogue driven storytelling kind of drama type of podcast, which are not every podcaster is trying to achieve that kind of a thing, but it does create a different experience in the audio. Like the Dolby Atmos
yeah,
technology too is another one that's playing around in these areas, and that's what this and Nomono is capable of doing too. There's a bunch of storytellers in Hollywood that are using this because it does have that spatial audio capability where it has place in the audio too, right? I mean, if the voice is coming from the right or the left, it actually has that depth of sound to it. So,
yeah. When I was at I think it's just called the Podcast Show in London, and
right.
they had some sort of car. I think it was a Toyota. I'm not sure what it was, but they had that
Mhm.
Dolby, Atmos or whatever you call it,
Yeah.
sound,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
played some Elton John, and I was like, "Holy cow!" It was just,
Yeah. It
it
sounds
was,
amazing.
yeah. So that's one of those things where when stuff first comes out, it's always expensive and it's only available on such and such, but eventually it's going to trickle down, and they'll have a new, you know,
Yeah.
special thing that we can't afford. So, um, and then John Jamango. How much does the new technology that I'm buying cost? I just joined. What is that new technology I'm buying named? Okay, it's a Nomono, and I remember I want to guess it was around $1,000. Right?
It's about $2,200.
Okay, well, I'm sorry I've
Yeah.
underbid.
I mean, it's brand new. It's only been out a few months. There's also another company out there called Insoundz, and that's INSOUNDZ.com, which is another platform that has that heavy noise reduction capability too, and they're trying to enter the U.S. market with their product as well. So there are technologies out there that are increasingly growing, especially they're getting linked up with AI technology increasingly, though, the AI part of it may be a little bit of a marketing spin to them, but
Mm,
I think that it's also something that we're going to increasingly see get integrated into platforms. I think we've seen a little bit of it with some of the hosting platforms, like a Buzzsprout or whatever, having magic mastering and those kind of
yeah,
technologies in there. And then others have it as well. And it's going to help improve our audio. I mean, a lot of podcasters get into situations where they're even recording at home in less than optimum
oh yeah,
recording environments, right? They have hardwood floors or they don't have pictures on the wall or something like that, and it creates an echo. So a lot of these technologies now can help eliminate some of that kind of distracting sound. Yeah.
yeah. I have a member of the School of Podcasting, and he's got little kids. He's got the house is they're probably thinking about maybe moving, but right now his only spot where he can kind of set up and not cause chaos is a hallway, and part of the hallway is a glass sliding door, and the
Oh boy.
floor is hardwood. And I
Oh
was
boy.
like, dude, you are podcasting from an echo chamber. And
Yeah.
so
Right.
there are some plugins that do a pretty good job of removing that excess reverb without degrading the sound. There's always that one little spot you're like, oh, that's pretty good. Then you go just like one click more, and you're like, "Yeah, okay, now we're underwater, and that doesn't work." But
Yeah.
it's amazing to see, because I had a weird thing last night. I don't want to turn this into the old guys talking about the old days, but I'm doing a lot of stuff with my website, because I've made some changes and they were apparently not good. And so I'm going through all these old pages and I have 900. If I say go to schoolofpodcasting.com/listener, that's a pretty link. There's a plugin I have
Yeah.
900 pretty links.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so many of them are to products that do not exist. Like, do you remember the thesis theme for WordPress? Because I forgot, like back in the early days of like 2005, WordPress was not, it was kind of a blogging thing. And
It was a
thesis,
very rough product in
yeah,
the early days. Yeah.
and thesis came along. I was like, oh, I can change my colors and I can adjust how many sidebars I want. And I was like, does that even? No, it does not exist anymore. So it was a fun trip down memory lane. But
I had a lot of problems with WordPress in the past, where you would update a plugin and the whole thing would break, or things like that. I mean, just common problems that would happen with that were frustrating. I mean, I don't know how many times I had to rebuild my WordPress instance from scratch because the code that got pulled into it through an update just destroyed it.
yeah,
So,
I shot myself in
yeah.
the foot. And here's the problem, because I use Podpage for most of my sites. And I went in and changed one thing, and I'm rusty now. Like every time I do things in WordPress, I'm kind of rusty. And I made a change, and it was something like in the settings, you put like what your domain is. And I changed it so that when I went back to the website, it kept forwarding, and it was just so luckily the guy at I use Maple Grove Partners, and he's pretty good. It's a guy and his dad, so you're not getting 24/7 response. But I was like, hey, I really shot myself in the foot. Can you restore? And he did, but I think that was my final straw. So I'm looking into actually moving the School of Podcasting onto Podpage. So we'll see if that happens. But some other quote. Now that you're here, this is going to be the Rob show, as it should be. If you guys don't know who Rob is, Rob's been podcasting since really before podcasting. You're doing radio shows.
Yeah.
He's,
Well, I was working with a lot of kind of podcast-like distribution companies and platforms before podcasting started. So
Yeah.
like back in 2023, I was working with my own content, my own show with Microsoft on a platform called Sync and Go.
Yeah.
And they actually started
I'm
that.
glad to see I'm not the only one. You said 2023. I did a blooper when I was inducting Daniel. You meant 2003, I'm assuming.
2003,
Yes.
correct.
See, I said
correct,
2017, and it was
Yeah, you get so
2007.
used to saying the 2020 thing that you forget to put the zero in there. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was about 2003 to 2005. So they actually killed the platform. It basically was a platform that worked with Windows XP and Pocket PC devices.
There you
So-
go. There's some phrases I haven't heard in a while.
Right. So you could transfer media files from your PC computer to your portable media player, which was the Pocket PC device.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, Craig wants to know, what's your show prep like for your YouTube live stream show? Do you read some text from a teleprompter? Are you leaning on AI for scripting and show prep? What's your
I do have I have a large teleprompter here that I use, and I do use AI for my outlines and things like that. But I also use AI with a note of caution because sometimes it uses words that are not natural to me, and I don't typically. I mean, I script it out pretty well, but I rarely entirely follow the script that closely. It's more just keep me on track with what I want to talk about, and then I put it in my own natural words. Usually is what I do with that too. So really the show prep is really more about mentally preparing me for what I want to cover. But since it is a live show, not unlike this show, where there's a lot of comments and questions, I get a lot of that on my show on StreamYard, and so it can be rather distracting from any kind of a strict outline. So you want to take it where your audience wants it to go, and then balance it with topics that you want to make sure you cover, especially if you have a guest. And that's kind of the format for live, and it's different than a pre-recorded show.
Yeah, I always laugh when I play with a bunch of different AI tools, but I remember the one day I went into Cast Magic and it had a thing for post this on LinkedIn. And I'm here to tell you 20% of the text were emojis. And I'm like, I don't know if it thinks I'm a 17-year-old girl or what, but I'm like, I don't do emojis like that as much. I'm not anti-emoji. I'm just like, yeah, this is not how I would type this. And it's always things like, in this truly exciting
Right. It
episode, blah,
uses
blah.
words that I wouldn't normally
Yeah.
use. Yeah.
So
Right.
there are times when I will go, and I am always I need to just set it up to go, please write this in first person. Because I know on the last episode of The Future of Podcasting was like, join Dave Jackson and Daniel J. Lewis as they, dive into the highly controversial, exciting, more adjectives that you can think of podcast. And I was like, really? Like,
yeah, you're not going to read that as part of your intro either. That's not going to.
Yeah.
That's not going to come across right.
So it's I use it as a brainstorming tool, and I usually go, ooh, I like part of number 1 and maybe some of 3 and a little of 7 and make my own. Because I don't know, are you developing a skill to spot AI text?
Well, I think there are certain characteristics of the output that you can associate with AI, definitely, and how it formats content. And that's why I tend to change that, so it doesn't necessarily look like it's formatted that way. And then I spend a lot of time on the delete button with AI generated stuff, and I spend a lot of time on the keyboard changing it. And then I also run Grammarly also, and it tears apart AI generated content. So so you've got this battle of AI tools that are battling over the content that's being generated. And I do like the combination of having like GPT create the original content and then run it through Grammarly, and then at the end I make the final edits. So there's like a 3-step process to this.
Well, there you go. I didn't know this. Did you know this? Gary is saying emojis are taboo now because they play havoc with screen readers, and I'm trying to avoid them on social media.
That's interesting. I didn't know people were even reading. Oh, well, no, I guess there are a lot of screen. Yeah, right. If there are a lot of. Yeah, I had this thing that came to my head about feed readers, not screen readers. So yeah.
Have
I can see where that would be the case. Yeah.
Have you ever seen someone use one of those? It's amazing. Because
yeah, I have actually. Yeah.
After a while, they just, it sounds almost like gibberish, because I mean, we're used to maybe speeding up things to 1.75, maybe 2x, but this just sounded like I'm like, what is that? He's like, and then he told me, and I'm like, you can understand it? And he goes, yeah. He goes, it's a skill that you just kind of pick up after a while, and it was pretty amazing. So we have
like a short code or something like that. It's like a short code or something, right?
Yeah. I have a friend of mine. He's known on the radio as Trapper Jack, and I never knew for years that Trapper Jack is blind. And he does a few shows. I just remember the tagline, which is driving me nuts. It's real people and real miracles. It's something Faith Live. I'm sorry, Trapper. But anyway, and I went to his house, and he was showing me, I guess he's legally blind. Like, his text is like, giant on his screen, and he can kind of do things, but it's like anything else. You learn your way around it. But we have a question from Ralph from the Ask Ralph podcast. He says, are you finding success from podcasters creating YouTube shorts and FB Reels, meaning Facebook, to promote your show and episodes? That seems to be, I don't know if it's working. I know a lot of people are doing it. I don't know. Do you know of anybody that's like, wow, that's really working?
Well, I think it depends on what you think what your goals are from it. I think, I tend to think about it as almost like it's a separate content channel. And it's hard to expect that there's going to be conversion to something else from that. I think we need to think about it as a kind of its own thing. And success comes from whatever numbers that come out of that particular medium, right? It's a separate kind of medium. It's this vertical video stuff. And I see larger numbers over there because it's so convenient and it's algorithmically presented to the consumption side of things. Where on the live side or the podcasting side, it's more of an intentional kind of discovery process. So you're kind of comparing apples to oranges there when it comes to the consumption behavior and what the content actually is too. It's usually a lot shorter too.
Yeah, I know for me, I almost avoid shorts right now because when I do, I sneeze away an hour. Yeah.
Right.
But
your life goes by, you'll never get it back.
yeah, and there was one guy, and I can't remember his name, but every time he came by, he's super sarcastic. And he'll be like, did you see in the paper today? Something, 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 blah, 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 snarky, snarky. And then he ends by drinking a thing out of his coffee, and it's super short. And he always makes me laugh. He was the one that was, I discovered there's a thing called time blindness for people that just can't get to work on time. I'm like, and it's not me. I suffer from time blindness. And I was like, and that was kind of him, like, really? Time blindness? And so it was pretty funny. And eventually I saw enough of his shorts that I subscribed to his channel.
Oh, you did? Okay.
And yet I still only really see him on shorts. It's like, but this is the first person ever that I was like, oh, wow, this is where shorts work. And I know I did a short a couple weeks ago, and I was all excited. I got a couple thousand views of it, and then I went in and saw where like only like 40% of a minute long short was viewed. So I was like, all right, that's a nice little kick in the teeth. But I did get 2 subscribers, and I was like, well, if it takes you, 10 minutes to do a quick short and you get 2 subscribers, I'm like, well, it would have been great if it was 20 or 200, but 2 is better than none. So I did not. Here we're learning all sorts of stuff. Guy Kawasaki is basically deaf, and he records his shows with real-time transcription of the guest he's interviewing. So, but anyway, do you do any shorts or anything, or have anybody doing that for you, Rob, or have you delved into the world?
Yeah, I
of
haven't
shorts?
actually been doing it for my own shows. I know I've done some shows on the Streamyard channels, on some of their other programs that they have, that they convert those into shorts and vertical videos and put those out, and they've done pretty well. And I think they're interesting, especially when you overlay the transcript on the screen, is that a lot of people consume those shorts in like a mute mode. So they don't actually listen, but they can read. Sometimes I find that the text goes by too fast for you to actually read it. And I think that is a hindrance too, but you also have to keep up with how fast the person speaks too. So it's kind of one of those things that you're trying to adapt your content to the experience, right? And the screen experience and what the user is actually doing with their device. And so, yeah, I mean, I've seen some success with it, and I want to do more with it. It's hard to do, like just this last week I did 4 live shows.
Wow.
And then I'm also doing a presentation at 6:00 tonight for a New York based kind of virtual event. So it's like it's just hard to get to everything and do all the shorts and do everything for all your shows. So there's just not enough time in the day, to be honest with you.
That's it. Yeah. Jeff says the master of video podcasting shorts is Chris Stone, who's in the chat room. Yeah. Castahead.net. He makes pretty stuff. Chris Nessie is saying he uses Opus and occasionally Headliner. And then,
there's a bunch of tools out there that make it easy. I agree with everybody here.
Yeah. Here again, it's like AI again gets you about 80% of the way there. I remember there was a tool once, and they had an unlimited version, and it would just slice and dice your stuff, and you'd like, wow, there's 12 videos they pulled out of this shorts. And then you look at them and go, and I'm going to use 3 of them. And I'm like, like, okay, because it'd cut you off in mid-sentence or something like that. And that was a while ago. So, and then Craig is saying, I think 16:9 YouTube shorts can also be cross-posted on Instagram Reels and TikTok. And I know I did something on Instagram this week because my last episode for the School of Podcasting was about Instagram. And it instantly said, hey, do you want this on Facebook? And I'm like, okay. So that makes life easy. So
yeah, I've been trying to stream live to the Instagram platform too, and I find it still a little bit too kludgy to really work with. I mean, because there's like too many steps involved in getting it done, and you never really know if it's quite working right. So I think they have some technical things to work on as far as streaming live to Instagram. Now, StreamYard supports that,
right?
But it's just a matter of, once you set it up in StreamYard, then you have to, when you go live, then you have to go back into the Instagram platform, then you have to activate it, and it just creates a lot of work that you have to do at the beginning of your show that distracts you from doing your show. So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And I know I just read, I want to say it's in April of this year. Like right now, if I wanted to, I could live stream into my private Facebook group, and that
Mm,
is going away in April.
that's gone. Right.
And I was like, well, that's I wonder why. Was my what's up with that Facebook? But it's Facebook and they're not known for their customer service. And I was like, because they really pushed everybody to build a group. And then
Right.
they're like, but
And now they're pulling capability out of it.
yeah,
It's, I hate to say, but it's the same thing that happened with Facebook with podcasting too. They were all gung ho, we're gonna support podcasting, and then a few months later they decided to pull the plug. So it's
yeah,
yeah, it's hard to work with these platforms.
yeah. Uh, Ralph is saying the AI tool in Descript is really good for shorts. Yeah, I know the other thing you can do in Descript, and I bought Jeff's in the chat room. I bought Jeff's course on Descript, and it's just one of those things where it's like when I buy a book, I'm like, oh, I'm going to pretend I have enough time to read this. But the thing with Descript is it changes all the time. But you can go and grab text, and then basically make it. It's like a new, I think they call it a composition. So if you just grab a minute worth of text and basically paste it into it, there's your short. Then you just export it and put the words and make it vertical and that
Yeah.
whole 9 yards. So yeah, but
And I find that the Descript platform is a little bit of a steep
janky.
learning curve to it.
No.
Janky, that's the word, right? It's not really intuitive to use.
No,
It's definitely built by engineers. It
Yeah.
works, Dave.
yeah, it's true.
It's the motto.
Yeah. So
It's not easy to use, but it works. Right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Daniel makes a good point, of course. I'm guessing too many people were spamming with the live streaming intergroups, which I did see on occasion. Where I'd be
Oh,
like,
were they? Okay.
there's like, it's a
Yeah.
live stream. They're like, yeah, well, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And again,
Right.
it's like you're in a group about topic A and your show is about topic whatever. And I'm just like, yeah. So
Okay.
here's another fun one. This came in from Reddit, and it's I created my 5th episode, and by far this is my best one in terms of content. I can feel it and have gotten feedback from friends and family. Well, there's a
Wow.
little red flag, but I hardly
Yeah, it
have
is.
any listeners yet for this one. At least my other episodes had that spike when I launched, but not for this one. Not sure what to do. I've been getting better at this craft, but listener numbers are very demoralizing, or soul crushing is my favorite phrase for that. I've committed to doing 21 episodes, but I want to try and reach more listeners, promoting on all platforms as well. It's not a video podcast. It's audio only for now, but I have a cover photo of me and my guest in promotions, which kind of is what we're talking about with, shorts and social. It's, well, number one, you're not getting as many downloads as you want on episode 5. Congratulations, welcome to podcasting. It's just
Right.
it's kind of the thing. And
Don't set your expectations too high at the beginning. Right?
yeah, and Rick, who's in the chat room, I did a quick went over and listened to his show, and I was like, I'm like, people are gonna love your show, or they're gonna like hate it, because there was a lot of sound effects and things like that. I'm like, it's kind of it's not janky, it was wacky. There's a difference between janky and wacky. And I'm like, now if you love wacky, it was very cool. And I said, but you do you. If you want to do this, be you. And he was like, that's funny, because he asked he told his friends, hey, this guy thinks I'm doing too many sound effects and stuff. And they all went, well, yeah, kinda. And he's like, wait a minute, I asked you guys, like, when you listened to it, and you said, oh, it's great, it's fine. Oh, I love it. Good job. And so
it's always the danger of getting feedback from people too.
Yeah.
Is that they're going to tell you what they think you want to hear, or not what you need to hear. Right.
Yeah. And so when I see family and friends, I'm like, okay. But, and then another question that came up was, and this is a classic, I just started, I'm a month in, or maybe 2 months in. Are my numbers good? And it's like golf. I'm trying to think of other sports you do that are, horseshoes to a certain extent. Anything that's a solo sport, you're really not competing against other people. You may think you are, and that's the problem, is you're trying to find out a way to hack. Can I get numbers from this other guy's show? Is that on Chartable? If I follow them and put in their hours, like, no, just compete against yourself. And because I have seen people that really, they were so excited. They had, oh my gosh, I got 40 downloads for an episode. And I'm like, congratulations, that's 2 full classrooms. And then somebody will
Right.
walk into a Facebook group and go like, yeah, I just went over 1 million. And they're like, wait, how, huh? And they get all,
Yeah.
flustered and that whole 9 yards. They can't figure it out. But yeah. And also when you're on episode 5, that was the other one. How long do you think it takes to, and again, grow? Even the word audience is subjective. Like some people, they're looking for 100 people. Other people are looking for 1,000 or 300 or, what do you typically, if somebody says, how long does it take to grow your audience? Do you have a time frame, or you just like,
I think it's going to vary, Dave, a lot based on the content and the genre and your personality and your network. I mean, there's so many variables that it's really hard to say how long. I think there's also a growth and development process. Do you have experience presenting? What's your expert base of knowledge? What's your
yeah,
there's just a lot of variables, but I think generally though, I think if you're wanting to build a community around your show, and I think that's the better way of looking at it, is to build a community around your show, and that's what I'm increasingly trying to do. That's why I'm doing more live, and I believe that's why you do live too, is because that helps build community. But I think you have to do it for probably at least a year. I think to really get your grounding of who you are in your show and how you're presenting, and become familiar with the medium and find your path, right, and have that audience find you, because what you're going to do is attract people to you based on what you're doing and your personality, and there's a certain kind of attrition or attraction process that happens over a period of time, and it comes in fits and starts. It doesn't, it's not a linear path. It's like, you do 10 episodes that don't have anybody listening, and then all of a sudden one will hit and you'll pop up a few, and then you'll go a couple more, and then it'll be like flatline, and then there'll be one show and you'll pop it up a little higher the next time. And that may take 2 or 3 months to get there. So I think you have to be patient. You have to be consistent. And I think you do have to really focus on trying to improve all the time.
yeah. And I think that you make a great point. You start to see what works. Like, okay, I've attracted some people, but I'm still not 100% sure on what's going to work and what's not. And
Yeah.
my last episode, it wasn't horrible. I just, when I put it out, I was like, this may not resonate with everyone, because it was really into Instagram, and I was
Yeah.
like, I'm not sure. I don't spend a lot of time on Instagram. I should probably spend more. But I thought, since I don't have a huge Instagram following, my audience may not have a huge Instagram following. And nobody said it was awful. I just had people like, yeah, I don't really use Instagram, so I skipped that one. So, and I knew that. I knew that when I put it out, I was like, and again, it's nothing against my guest. It was more the topic. And I was like,
Yeah.
I don't know if this is going to work. And I've got a few people are like, yeah, that one was okay. I was like, and that's where I was like, I should have, it would work on. I have a show about podcasting resources. I have a show about monetization, which kind of ties in, because he's built a tool that does, if you DM me this, I will do this. It's almost like Zapier for Instagram. And so
Okay.
then it's called Social Stampede. And so then you can see, because unlike, on an email list, you might get their name and email, but then you have to like Google their name and try to figure out what they are. This is like, no, this person just did your thing on Instagram. So now you can click on their Instagram and look at their, you kind of get to know them through their Instagram.
Right.
So it's interesting. It was a cool tool, and he gave me a demo, and I was like, all right, I see where this could be cool. But on the other hand,
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, but if you're not in Instagram, my audience may not be thrilled with this topic. So, and like I say, nobody threw tomatoes at me, and I noticed my retention rate went down a little in Apple, and so I was like, all right, well, I should have maybe listened to my inner because I think I am a pretty good judge at this point of what's going to work. Like this week, I'm having Gary Arndt from Everything Everywhere. Do you know Gary at all?
Mm-mm, I
Oh,
haven't met him. Mm-mm.
Gary is he's a podcasting machine, and he was a travel photographer and had this really successful blog, and COVID. So he's like, well, I still need to eat. So he started this podcast, and it's daily. He writes it
Wow.
out, and it's 10 minutes or less, and it's always like, why is the sky blue? All these like little, and sometimes it's science, and it's like kind of, I would call it like dinner party talk. Like, oh, did you know that, that kind of thing. And he does it daily, and he's been really just busting his hump, and he's now getting 1 million downloads a month.
Well, I think there is something to that, Dave. If you
Yeah.
really think about the short form content on a daily basis, that's I hate this term, but the snackable content is probably analogous to this example. Is that maybe there is something to what he's doing, obviously, that works, and that is the shorter form content more frequently. And I do think that shows that are done more frequently typically do a little better in the long run, but it takes more upfront commitment to do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you have to be organized, and you really have to, be able to do it in the face of life. I mean, to take on, I don't know if you're ever willing to do this, Dave, is take on a daily show, but it's a commitment, and it's not easy.
Yeah. Before there was James Cridlin, I tried a news show, and it was it's brutal. So when I hear people go, I'm going to do a daily show, in my brain, I'm going, no, you're not. Because
It's going to be 4 days this week and 3 days next week.
Yeah,
and,
it's tough, and there comes, because you're gonna have those days when you're like, I don't want to do the show today, or you batch them, which is what most people do, and
Right.
it's just and then you have to really love that subject because it doesn't take as much time to do a long show as it does a short show, but if you think the
Right.
research it takes to make one little baby topic might be the same amount of research as it does to make a long topic. You're just
I agree
picking the
with you.
best parts out of it. And that's
Yeah, because you have
where,
to really focus on trying to drive enough value into that short form content to make it worth somebody taking the time to find it and play it and all that stuff.
yeah. Well, that's
I-
doing a short show to me is harder because you have to figure out what am I really trying to say and what's the
Yeah,
key takeaway. Where if you
being
got a
concise.
longer thing, you're like, oh, you can kind of talk about anything because I got more time to fill.
Yeah, like the kind of shows that we do, right,
Yeah.
are typically longer form, and from a historical perspective, longer form has tended to do better in
Yeah.
podcasting than short form. But I do wonder if there's opportunity there because there's so few short form, that there's maybe a little bit of opportunity there.
Yeah. Seth Goden, just on his show, Akimbo, was doing a Q&A, and somebody asked him about his format and the
Mhm.
fact that, hey, it's short and it's solo. You're not interviewing people. And he said, well, he goes, I did a show that was an interview-based show. And he goes, I think I'm pretty good at it, but I wanted to do something that stood out. So I did something
Yeah.
short, and I did it solo. And he had a great quote. It was something like, it doesn't have to be, it's not important that it's short. It's more important that it's good. And I was like, oh, that is
Yeah, but
like,
what's good, Dave? I mean,
yeah, yeah,
what's that criteria of, people always say in this medium, well, you got to create good content. Well, I think when you say that, you have to qualify that and say, well, what do we think is good content? What does that look like? What does that sound like? What is the
yeah.
experience of good content?
It's usually like
Um,
10 minutes of talking about your cat, followed by
that's it. That's it.
French toast recipes and anything that's janky in your life. You talk about, no. Well,
Well,
Seth
that's what
Godin,
we would do. Definitely. That's what
that's
we
it.
would do, Dave.
So, but for me, Seth Godin is a guy that makes me think. Like all of
He
his
does.
marketing
Right.
books are like, So he's definitely a think guy. John Oliver is my favorite example because he makes me think because he's on
Well,
his
he's funny too.
yeah, and he's
He's funny
funny.
too.
It's
Yeah.
educational. It makes me groan. There are times when he's showing things that the government's doing on the show's called Last Week Tonight on HBO, and
Oh, yeah, yeah, right.
so it's kind of political. Well, it's very political, but he's making fun of the government while he makes me think. He's educating me because I didn't know the FDA is just a joke at this point, and it's weird. I don't want to eat anymore. I just saw there was a thing on Netflix where they studied twins, and they gave one twin, identical twins, one twin a meat kind of healthy diet and one a vegan diet, and then they did this study, which kind of led everyone to believe that vegetables are good for you. Shocking. And then I watched Netflix, and there's a thing called poison, and they explain how the FDA isn't really keeping our food safe, and vegetables may not be good for you. So at this point, we're just not going to eat, and I'll go back to Twinkies and Pop Tarts because we don't really know what those are.
Well,
So
there's also degrees of being healthy with different kinds of food too. I mean,
yeah,
it's like, does it have pesticides on it? Is the meat, grass fed? Is it processed? Does it have a bunch of preservatives injected into it? I mean,
that's
there's
it.
levels of complexity when it comes to food that I spent many years working in the food industry myself. So
That's
I
right.
could talk I could do a whole podcast just about
Orange
the
juice.
food
Yeah.
stuff. Right. Yeah.
DR says cats, Frenchie, toast, janky. You just described my my whole life. This is something that I'll be interested to see. Randy has a great question. What do you think Rode is going to do with Mackie? We just heard I don't know if they bought them or they
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
annexed them or whatever the official verb is, but they kind of did that, and we're all like, because Mackie has this new, almost like a Rodecaster Duo,
Yeah.
and oh man, I'm not good with names today, but I've seen a few people that have said the Mackie, because they have one that's like the size of your car, that's like the Rodecaster, and
Right.
yes, it's a much bigger footprint, but it lets you do more things in it. There's a few more features in terms of audio. I think Rode
Right.
kind of went into the gaming world a bit with MIDI controlling and things like that, but I heard we're Mackie in terms of playing with the audio. So both those brands are now owned by the same company, and I'm
Yep.
like, it'd be like somebody buying Burger King and McDonald's. I'm like, okay, so I don't know, unless they made one that was considered, and they're both the same price. So if one was considerably cheaper, you'd be like, oh, that's doing this market. But they're both kind of the same thing. So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I think that the Mackie brand has had a historical orientation, a little bit more towards the more professional side
Yeah.
of content creation. And that may be what they bought is also taken out a competitor too. So, and then being able to maybe integrate those brands, or to keep Mackie as its own standalone brand, and then integrate some of the technology that Rode has into those platforms. I think when companies acquire other companies like that, you kind of have to wonder what the motivation is, because there's a lot of duplication of activities and effort in there. And I think we've seen that happen in
Oh
our
yeah.
own
Yeah.
industry, right? Where you have two hosting companies or podcast hosting companies merge with each other, and how destructive that can be.
How many
And
HR
that,
people do we need? Yes.
right, or accountants or
Yeah.
whatever that is, right? But I do, Rode is definitely wanting to capture more market share, and that may be a way of doing that. So,
Yeah. Jeff has a great point. I just had it. He said, someone needs to put together a list of short form successful podcasts. One of my favorite ones was Mike Rowe.
oh yeah,
The way I heard it, and his
the,
tagline was something for the person with a short attention span. And then he got Rogan fever and started doing these hour plus things, and that was literally the show I would shower to, because like it was this great story. He even says, look, I just ripped off Paul Harvey, that's all I'm doing. And they were really really well written, they were great, and he
yeah.
just was like, huh. So but yeah, I'm trying to think if I have a short. I listened to Danny from Captivate. He has I have a list in my. I use Castmatic. What do you listen to? What do you use to listen to podcasts? What's your?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Mainly Apple Podcasts, because I've got an iPhone,
Oh, there you
and I
go.
also listen to them in my my Tesla Model 3 too,
Ah,
because I've got the Apple Podcast app installed in my car now. So
nice. Yeah, I think it's called Daily Podcast Tips. I don't. I've listened to all of his last shows, so uh,
mhm.
but that's a fun little like minute long show. And I'm trying to think if I have any other ones that are really quick. Just the Tip is another podcast show that's usually pretty quick. So I like to have I have a couple shows that I listen to because like a walk around the block is maybe 10 minutes, so
Yeah.
I like to have the little shorter shows that I'm like, oh, where the no agenda show is 3 hours and that takes me 2 days to get through. It's,
Yeah.
I like it, but,
And it's so radio-like too. That's the thing about that show that's interesting. That
well,
yeah,
you have that Adam
it's
Curry
Adam. It's
influence,
Adam. Right.
yeah,
Exactly.
all about it. And Steven wins another award here. I was trying to remember. I said Trapper Jack. It's Philip Keller, and the show is Touched by Heaven: Everyday Encounters with God. So I was talking. It's a throwback. If I was a comedian, that'd be a throwback joke. But I remember something of that nature. But the other thing I thought I would talk about today is everybody's like, I just need more gear. I need this and that. And I'm going to see if I can do this live. Now I realize, dear audio listener, I will explain what's going on, but I'm dragging my notes over to my Elgato prompter, and you'll see where suddenly now I'm in a smoky bar
I
and
saw that.
on my
Yeah, I saw
screen.
that change,
And
Dave.
when I move it
Right.
over, and I'm like, I thought it might be because that screen is now getting brighter, but I'm like, it's only a 9-inch screen, and it's more than an arm length away from me. And so that is on my list of things to troubleshoot. I did
Yeah.
realize that I'm using my Elgato Facecam Pro, and it is flash up against the back of this teleprompter, but they do have a little cloak that you put over whatever camera you have there. And I was like, well, maybe because I'm cloakless, maybe that is somehow putting extra light into that. But it's weird because I always look, I am white as, I have me and the sun don't get along. So I'm always like Casper the Ghost looks at me and goes, man, you are white. That's just the way I am. And so anything of a screen always reflects, like even if I turn off my right monitor, yeah, you can see on this side of my screen, I'm looking that way. And I always look, I'm embarrassed. Oh, and then Rob clicked on the wrong thing, I believe. Yeah. All right. And Rob has left the building. So it's one of those things. I say that because like I just for my birthday bought a pair of Varipoles, and he's back. And isn't technology grand?
Just
And
dropped out. It just froze. We
oh,
were both frozen, but that's
oh,
okay.
always fun. But so I just say that as much as we all want, ooh, if I just had that piece of gear, I now have somewhere in my future, I have troubleshoot the teleprompter because I don't know what's going on. Because there are times when I want to put a script over here, and usually if it's a script, I go into the teleprompter. So, but it's just a weird thing that happens, and on occasion I'll like, oh, I'll just move it over here, and it just kind of fleshes out my screen, and I don't know why. So,
It
um,
shouldn't be doing that.
they
Right. There's
as the old,
something going on.
yeah,
Yeah.
the old mo money, mo problems. I'm like, more gear, more troubleshooting. Um,
Yeah, I've got a teleprompter right here too. There's a screen right here.
yeah. There you
Here,
go.
I can
Yep, I see it.
pull it up right here. It's
They're
a
handy.
it's a 15-inch flat screen.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jeff says you can use the Elgato camera hub to dim the screen. Yeah, that's what I need to do. And
Oh yeah.
this is a weird thing with the Elgato prompter is I have that. I went in today and I even started. I quit the camera hub software and then restarted it, and that usually connects the prompter back again, and it's
Hmm.
not. So I'm gonna have to turn off the prompter, probably unplug it, plug it back in, do the hokey pokey, turn yourself around because that is, you guessed it. Right now, the connection between the software and the prompter is, say it with me, it's kind of janky. So that's the way. Now, Ralph has
That's
one.
the word of the day. That's the word of the day.
He is. He said he
Uh,
just got the prompter to use for my Zoom meetings, and my remote clients
um,
love it. It is kind of cool because, like, normally I would be looking like this. So it always looked like I was, just staring at Jim for the whole show.
Oh
And
boy.
so yeah. So, and yeah, Rob the good news is, see, when Rob locks up, there you go. And you're back. You locked up for a second, but you looked very happy when you did it. So I don't know what's going on. Here's a fun one. And I thought this would be a good topic to talk about. I'll wait till Mr. Greenlee resumes and there he is. There you go. Sometimes you feel like a nut and sometimes you don't. But here's a fun one. When you worked at Podcast One, I know you worked with celebrities. Did you have anybody on a team just quit? Like yesterday they were on the show. Hey, where's so-and-so at? They quit. Did that ever, or have you ever had any situation like that?
Yeah, I mean, people, there's conflicts that happen in an organization and people disagree with each other and they decide that this isn't the place for them. Yeah, I mean, it happens.
Yeah.
It's happened. I mean, I don't remember it happening a lot at Podcast One, but
Yeah.
I've seen it happen in other places.
Well,
Yeah.
I saw this post and I was like, this is something maybe that people need to dig in a little deeper. And the title was my co-host just quit. Does anyone else have this problem?
Mm.
I've been podcasting for a while now, and this keeps becoming a recurring problem. It just makes me want to give up. And so
Oh boy.
I thought, when you pick your co-host, don't get someone who thinks just like you. Everybody thinks, oh, I've known this person, and we're like, that's because then you're going to be redundant. What do you think about this? I love it too. So, and then look at, because I've learned, I don't plan on getting married anytime soon, if ever again. But if I do, I'm going to take a long, hard look at the family. Like, I know I love her. She's great. But I'm going to look at the family, because when you marry somebody, you marry the family. And when you get a co-host, you're also getting their family. And so
Yeah.
look, you might be flying solo and, just doing whatever you want. And your co-host, has 3 kids, a minivan, and 3 jobs. That's going to be different to kind of deal with. So it's not that they don't love the show, they just have other priorities. And then the other thing I would look at is, what's their why? Like if their job is, oh, I want to be famous and I want to be a thought leader or whatever it is, and they stick around for 6 episodes and they're not on Jimmy Fallon, like, well, yeah, it's going to take maybe a little bit like that. Jeff does have a great thing. I have rotating co-hosts. And
yeah, I've done that before too.
Plus, I have friends who are really good that call and fill in. Yeah, well, you kind of do that now with your YouTube. Now, is that YouTube the podcasting tips with friends? Rob Greenlee show is that available as a true podcast? Like, can I listen to that on Apple?
Actually, I'm building that out right now. So all the
Okay.
episodes I've done about 15 episodes, and it's going to be put out as an audio and video podcast. I'm already building that out right now as we speak. So it should be out in probably the next week. It should be fully up there with all my past episodes too. So yeah, it's going to be just like the new media shows the same way. It's audio and video
Yeah.
podcast, as well as on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, all the platforms. So yeah.
Yeah, and then SP says eek redundant, like James Cridlin defines redundant. Yeah, redundant means you're going to get fired. And yeah, that's kind of it. You don't need
Well,
2
yeah.
people saying the same thing. Rick says, my fiance quit us. That's why I now have 2 podcasts. There you go. So who needs her when you have a podcast? Ask Ralph, podcast.com says, get a co-host prenup. Yeah.
Get a prenup. Right.
There is one. Our friend Gordon Firemark.
I'm sure he's got one.
Right. I think it's podcastprenup.com, if I remember right. But he's got one. And we've talked about that. I mean, you've probably seen it. I've seen it at Libsyn where co-hosts, Ernie and Bert get into a struggle and it gets ugly quick. But I just
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it can. It doesn't always go smooth. I've had a lot of co-hosts before. I've had multiple co-hosts for my radio show. I had like 4 or 5 different people that I rotated through co-hosting that show. But I also had 1 to 2 other co-hosts. So that was like a 3rd person or a 4th person on that show. And then I would do like 3 interviews each episode. So it was kind of more of a radio format, but it was. I learned a lot from that. I learned a lot working with different people, and I also did for many years. I did the Spreaker live show, and Dave, I think you were maybe a guest on that as
Yeah.
well. And
Alex
that
Exum.
show, Alex Exum, and I picked him because I mean he was a passionate Spreaker user and podcaster, but he's also an actor. He's got a big personality, which is in contrast to me, which I'm kind of a laid back dude,
Kinda?
and but yeah, and Alex is not that. So it's
No.
creating some contrast, right? Is what you want, because some of your audience will really love Alex because of his extremes that he presents on the show, his energy and his extreme comments, and there's a little old me that kind of like puts the audience to sleep. So
Rob's like, "That's
some people
it?
like that.
That's it? I'm mad,
Yeah,
I'm
I mean,
very angry, and I'm upset.
yes,
That's it."
I'm really extreme right now. Yes, yeah.
Uh, but,
It's
speaking of
the
Jeff,
anti-extreme extreme is
well,
what
and
it
that
is for
works
me.
great with Todd. Todd's like, "Oh, I can't this guy's crazy."
Well,
He's like,
it's the same formula,
yeah,
that's why Todd and I got together, is because, I'm the level-headed guy. I mean, you can
yeah.
see it in the comments
Oh, yeah.
on Apple Podcasts. It's like, Rob's the
Yeah.
unappreciated expert in the industry, and Todd, what's wrong with you?
My
It's like,
the favorite
yeah.
thing I love to hear come out of Todd's mouth is, I probably shouldn't say nothing, but and that's it. Like
But I'm going to.
whatever's next. Let's see how I can say this. It rhymes with Microsoft. There, okay, and I'm like, okay, it was okay, whatever. So it
Yeah.
rhymes with schmode, but it's a microphone company, so that's good. I think I'm okay. Like, no, so yeah,
So I think over the last probably the last couple of years, we've been at each other's throats a little bit more than we have in the past. So
well,
it's
that's because you're a defector. You're a YouTube loving video guy now, so that's
right, exactly. So it's like, I should be this pro audio guy, but if you really look at what Blueberry's doing, and he's pushing more on the video side. So don't tell anybody. Plus, he
yeah,
also talked bad about AI in the early days, and guess what he was doing on
yeah.
Blueberry was building out AI capabilities. So,
Yeah.
right,
Well, I now describe it this way because there are podcasts which are audio and video, and I'm going to kind of use
right.
the Rob Walsh school and say, and if you're really a podcast, you should be an Apple. So that's a podcast. Then you have
A
what I
lot of shows not though. That's the
right.
shocking thing.
So now
Right,
I have a term I call them YouTube podcasts, which means it's on YouTube and YouTube Music. That's a YouTube podcast, and then there are
yep,
YouTubers. So when I
yep,
hear it's a video podcast on YouTube, I go, that's a YouTuber. So that's how I'm describing it. And, but if that YouTuber tells me it's a podcast, I go, I can listen on Apple. And he goes, no. And I'm like, then you're a YouTuber and embrace your
right.
YouTubeness. So, but I heard Steve from that guy. It's a famous Steve. He's the head of something. He was part of Acast. He's got glasses. Oh, somebody else's
I'm trying.
the chat room will come. But anyway,
I can't remember.
yeah, he did with they did a big presentation, he and this other guy, and they were the ones that said, "Hey, the users think YouTube is a podcast, so we're just going to call it a
Right.
podcast." And I get that,
Yeah.
but the teacher in me goes, "No, we should have educated them." No, that's YouTube,
Right.
but we didn't, and I
Right.
get that. But
Well, I think that they know that. I
yeah,
just think that audiences are increasingly seeing what they're seeing on YouTube, just like this is being seen on YouTube.
yeah,
And this is a podcast about podcasting. So I don't know what, the audience perceives what it is as based on the format and what we're doing here. And that's where this is really coming from, in my view, anyway. And I'm not advocating against the position that podcasts are really RSS based, because that's where I started. That's
right.
where most of the industry is today. But I do think that the research is increasingly starting to show that the audiences, especially the younger audiences, don't really care about that distinction anymore.
Right. Well,
So
that's SP says it matters what the public calls it, to which Chris says, "Are we still on this hill? Really? We're still talking
right,
about
are
that?"
we still are we
Um,
still bashing
you know,
this? Right, yeah,
yeah. So
yeah.
I get it. To me, now I can't wait to see the next report on YouTubers. Like, how's that gonna, like, are they gonna, is the same thing gonna happen? Are they gonna accidentally talk about podcasters who aren't YouTubers? Because I'm like, that's my whole thing. We kind of,
Well, and Todd talked about it. Todd Cochran on the New
yeah,
Media Show just this past week. He was talking about that he in his team have been doing some research into podcasts that are YouTubers
yeah,
and YouTubers that are podcasters, just to have an understanding of what's going on there. And there is a line of differentiation here. I mean, there's a lot of YouTubers that are doing their shows looking and sounding like a podcast. So that's where it's really kind of confusing the audiences about what they are. And does it really matter anymore? It's kind of my point. Audiences are going to perceive what it is based on their perception. And that's what we're seeing happen as an industry in content creators. We need to understand what the differences are here. But
yeah.
but
There-
but if we're speaking to audiences, we have to speak to them in ways that that they're wanting to see it as well.
yeah. Uncle Marv says, but there's a new movement to only be on Podbean. I think he means, do they have to be on Apple to be a podcast? Well, you don't have to be on Apple. I'm just saying,
There's
if
a
you're
new movement to only be on
on
Podbean.
Podbean, that was me. I'm like,
Really?
I've never, I know Podbean just started doing AI stuff. I heard that announced.
They just announced it last week.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Chris says people call albums records. Records used to be singles. In the end, none of it matters. That's true. Because I thought about that. If you take an
Well, now
old,
it's all singles, right? Mostly these
yeah,
days.
yeah, and so because we had titles, right? Let's take a Beatles album. That's been an album. It's been a cassette. It's been 8-track. It's been CD. Maybe even a laser disc for a movie or something. But it was always the same thing. And I think the difference here is we never said a CD was radio. Like, you know what I mean? We're changing the definition of something, and that's where I'm like, again, am I going to die on that hill? Maybe not. So it is what it is. Yeah, and somebody brought up a topic. Somebody's talking about Clubhouse. Yeah, just listen to a show.
It's
that
still
was,
around.
yeah,
Still
that was
going.
originally live on Clubhouse. It's still a thing, I guess she says, but so
Yep.
annoying when you listen to a replay. Yeah, people
Right.
always say podcasting is conversations, and I go, true, but a podcast is a conversation with the boring parts removed. And I think sometimes people are like, oh, I'm just going to keep it real. And I'm like, well, okay, real boring in that case, when they're doing like today we had the weird mix up with the video stuff. Like now on YouTube, you get the full unedited version of the video because of
Yeah, you can't.
if YouTube
Well,
allowed you to swap out a video, that would be amazing. And I would edit it. But
you can edit it in YouTube in their back end. It's just kind of a kludgy
or
process.
janky even. Yes. So
Janky. Janky is probably the more appropriate term. Yes.
yeah. Oh, you know what I haven't done yet? Let's do this. Although I got to do a quick backup on this. And that is, it's time to thank our awesome supporters. And Rob, you've not been around, I don't think ever, for the Wheel of Names. And so, yeah, so we want to thank our awesome supporters. If you go to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome, deeply appreciated. And this show is brought to you by the schoolofpodcasting.com. We have courses, we have coaching, and that is unlimited one-on-one coaching along with the group coaching and a really kick-butt community. We've got comedy writers, we've got psychologists, we've got a couple retired pastors. We've got Chris in there he's got the music biz and marketing and video background. It's an awesome place. If you go to schoolofpodcasting.com/coach, you'll save on either a monthly or yearly subscription. We're talking earlier about websites, and Ask the Podcast Coach runs on Podpage. If you want to check it out, use my affiliate code, trypodpage.com. And right now we're using Ecamm Live. If you like it, Madge, you're soaking in it. Go to supportthisShow.com/Ecamm. And Jim isn't here. And if you go, man, what happened to Jim Collison? He is out with some personal stuff today. And you can find him at theaverageguy.tv. And it's that time. And this is where, Rob, we go to the Wheel of Names. And what this is, these are my $20 patrons. And so we have people like Glenn over at the Horse Radio Network and Ralph at AskRalphPodcast.com and LiveWell and Flourish.com. There's a ton. So first we have to shuffle it. So there's no shenanigans going on. We don't want it
Yes,
to
I
be.
see Ross Brand in there too.
Ross
right?
Brand is in there, a bunch of
Yep.
Felix from Latin Podcast Awards, all sorts of stuff. So I click on this, we spin the wheel of names, and this will now be the featured patron of the week. And it's going to be Craig from livewelandflourish.com. Speaking of a really good short show, that is one that definitely comes up. So, Craig, thank you so much for your patronage. Check him out at livewelandflourish.com. But they're all really short, and they, much like Seth Goden, he makes you think. So put your brain on and your thinking cap. You might have to dust that off. I haven't used my thinking cap since I was about 6, but I think I still have it. So if you go to askthepodcastcoach.com/support, it's deeply appreciated. And also, I don't mention this enough. Thanks to everyone who is streaming Satoshis to the show and boostograms and all that other fun stuff. And if you're like, what is that? Go over to modernpodcastapps.com and get yourself a new one. And what do you think the chances are of Apple ever supporting streaming Satoshis?
I think it's going to be many years in the future.
Yeah.
I don't think it's right around the corner.
I would say we'll both be old and gray, but that's kind of now. And yeah, it's I am excited that they're embracing the, what you call it, tag. Yeah, transcriptions. That's exciting.
Yeah, but my worry on that is that may be the only tag they support.
Yeah.
So, because that was fairly low hanging fruit for them. And it also was in the middle of a case that was settled around the ADA, which is the American Disabilities Act, which has closed captions, and that would be a much faster way for Apple to get into their ecosystem closed captioning. So that would be maybe a motivation for them to have done that. So,
well, and if we put our dark sunglasses on, it's also a way for some of these companies that are trying to. I know you've talked a lot about brand suitability, and which I think is the new buzz phrase instead of brand safety. That it may be easier to, scan a transcript than to, if you're trying to figure out what's going on in that show. And the chat room is going crazy. Before we'll take a 10-second tangent here. Live Well and Flourish coming up with episode 100 very soon. So, and Ralph says it's a great show, awesome podcast. It's a must listen for him. So, yes. And then Craig is saying if Apple ever does embrace that, they'll take 30% of every Satoshi. So, yeah, brand suitability. I know it's something you've see a lot of and things like that. I just think it's weird that we're coming up with a whole industry to somewhat stalk podcasters in a way, and I get it. I know last week I asked, why don't people just say, the views and the opinions expressed on the show do not necessarily reflect those of their sponsors? I'm like, wouldn't that just get rid of that? But the problem is, and I think this would happen even if it's brand safe or brand suitable, people are always going to sue. So, or things like that. So I'm not sure that would fix it either, but any thoughts on the whole? Because to me, when I hear it, I just like, oh, is this going to mean everybody's going to put out a vanilla podcast that doesn't offend anyone? And, I'd hate to be a comedian these days. So,
well, and that's a terrific example. If you do a search in YouTube today, you can find a clip in there from the Conan O'Brien podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Where he talks about brand safety and brand suitability in that particular episode. His kind of like the CEO of his company, Adam Sachs, joined him on a show to talk about brand safety with Conan on his podcast. And we all know Conan is a comedian and likes to make fun of a lot of different things. And it became clear to him when he was looking at his report card of sorts of his brand suitability and safety, is that there were topics that he just couldn't go into anymore if he wanted to keep his sponsors. And so he actually talked about that, how it may cause him to change his content. And do we want Conan to change his content and be maybe less funny? And that is really the consequence of this brand safety and suitability that's happening right now. It's a very complicated subject because, this concept of self-censorship is really what's at stake here.
Yeah.
the content creator or the podcaster having a list of things, and this has been going on YouTube for a long time. That there's only, there's certain topics that they actually will warn you that you can't say certain keywords or say certain things or talk about certain topics, else you'll be demonetized or taken down. And that's kind of where my red flags go off, or as far as what's going on here, and am a little concerned about it, about what the implications are long term for these platforms. And the thing that we're seeing happen is that they're still not as good as they need to be to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish, because they're very keyword sensitive still today, even though
Yeah.
they claim to be contextually aware. There was a whole kind of news story that came out in Pod News this past week about the New York Times losing revenue based on being sensitive to certain topics in their news podcasts. And so they were losing sponsors because they were talking about the
Right.
war in the Middle East,
Wow.
that kind of thing. And is that what is that the intent here? Or is it just a byproduct of the technology really not being able to adequately evaluate context?
Yeah. Craig says it's not easy to take ad money and keep creative license. It's tough.
It's increasingly being a challenge now.
Yeah.
Right.
Uncle Marv says Conan had been the best night talk host since David Letterman. Be ashamed. Yeah, it's one of those things where, especially because now they've come out reports with the iOS 17 cutting downloads by 30%. If
Yeah.
your ad performed well, it now performed 30% more than, like, if it was working, like you did that with fewer people. So
Right.
I used the analogy. I said if you heard that 10 people pushed a car up a really tall hill, you'd be like, wow, those guys must be really strong. And then you find out it was 7. You're like,
Right.
wow, those guys must be really strong. So you have a really engaged audience. Yeah, it stinks that, our ego takes the hit that the numbers went down. But yeah,
Yeah, because the inverse of that is that the ROI went up, I mean, as a percentage basis, right? So if you had a certain amount of results that came from that ad campaign, with, a much larger number of listeners, if that number reduces, that means that it took fewer listeners to drive that ROI. So maybe it should mean that podcasts are valued more.
yeah.
But I'm not sure that's how this is being utilized, or I think it's just a reduction in revenue is what's really happening.
Well, and the other thing with transcripts is how many people are just going to go Taylor Swift and Taylor Swift and Taylor Swift, so that anybody
Mhm.
searching for Taylor Swift will now find this podcast, even though we're not talking. We are one of the few things not talking about Taylor Swift, but it's one of those things where I could see people. I remember in the early days of the internet, people would put white text on a white background so you
Yeah,
couldn't see the
right. I remember
text,
that.
and it'd just
Right.
be like Pamela Anderson naked or whatever. And I was like, really? Is this
Keyword stuffing is what they
Yes.
called it back then. Right.
Yeah. Well, speaking of stuffing and crazy things like that, Randy has a question. He says, do you think real clickbait titles have gone overboard on YouTube broadcasts, half hour saying hi to listeners before even talking about what the title says? Yeah, I have a problem with this show where maybe the best topic happened at the 20-minute mark. And so I've had people on YouTube go, hey, like, why did it take you 23 minutes to do it? I'm like, because we're kind of making this up as we go along. I've tried to
Mhm.
now come think of, like, okay, what's the topic, that we should start with? But then
Yeah.
somebody will, bring up this great topic 14 minutes in, and I'm like, well,
Yeah,
that's,
that takes you on a different path, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
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 Yeah, then Craig has a great point. Ricky Gervais and Bill Burr are good examples of comedians who've been influenced by ad suitability, who haven't. I think that's what, yeah, haven't been influenced. Yeah, those guys. I love
Yeah, some
Ricky
of them
Gervais.
will push back on it and
Yeah.
say, "I don't care." Right.
Well, Ricky Gervais' last special on Netflix, he brings up, he goes, people didn't like my last show on Netflix. They tried to get me banned. They tried to pull it off. And oh, by the way,
Yep.
top rated comedy stream for that month. So thank you very much. And he goes, so I'd like to start off by, and he just basically says a bunch of offending stuff. And he goes, so please try to have me removed. I really, really appreciate it. And I was like,
Right. Thank you so much. Well, it's the
yeah.
same thing that Dave Chappelle does,
Oh,
right? I
yeah.
mean, Dave doesn't care about blowback on anything
Yeah.
he does because he's an old school comedian, and that's his reputation, that's his brand of doing that. It's just that the world has kind of changed, but he hasn't.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah.
So, as we're going to wrap up here in a bit, if you had any advice, so somebody comes to you and go, I want to start a podcast. What is Rob Greenlee's like opening statement to the brand new podcaster who's thinking of starting a podcast and they want to, I want to do this. It sounds like fun.
Yeah.
I want to do whatever. What are the typical things you say to that person?
I would say that the number one thing is just get centered on your purpose and your reason for doing it, and really think about the alignment with you and your personality and what your goals are in your life. And increasingly successful podcasts are mission driven, right? So you have a purpose and you're trying to drive some sort of a change or an improvement for others based on your own life experience. And so having a somewhat of an understanding of what you're trying to accomplish, it doesn't have to be like a 40-page business plan or something like that. It can just be written on the back of a napkin, like the early days of technology companies where the best ideas were just jotted down very briefly. But I think really starting that way, and then over time, the odds are that you're going to change anyway. So you're going to add things, you're going to remove things, you're going to change how you do things and how you think about it as you learn, especially if you don't have a lot of experience doing it. And I struggle with these things too. I mean, I'm not immune to. I come up with a lot of different podcast ideas and topics and share those with other people and help them, just like you do, Dave. I mean, I'm sure you do a
Oh,
lot of the same stuff too. And it's like there's no one right answer for anyone. It's really taking who they are, what their goals are, what they're trying to do, and kind of build something that is sustainable for them. And it doesn't have to be. I'm not really a big fan of this kind of how mainstream media tends to create podcasts where they try and come up with a concept that they think is marketable, and then they go out and find talent that can fill in with that. That's kind of a inorganic way of creating, I think, true, authentic podcast content. So I know it's a long-winded answer, but because it's a
no,
long-winded topic,
it
right?
is. And like you said, it's kind of it's hard to answer. It really depends on each person and the topic
Yeah,
and their
yeah,
talent and all that. And yeah, it's hard. It really is. So many people think, oh, I just talk into a microphone and thousands of
yeah.
people listen to me. Like, not really. So, yeah, and
And there's this X factor, right? That you just, it- it's alignment with its timing. It's
yep,
also relevancy in the moment. It's your particular energy that you're bringing that's the X factor that you just can't factor in, and that's why it takes time
yeah,
to develop that X factor, and that uniqueness and that cadence and that consistency and that kind of awareness. That takes time to build.
yeah. I always remember the Cliff Ravenscraft got lucky. Now, granted, you have to keep people listening, but he'd started a show about the TV show Lost, and then
Yep.
CBS launched one. And when people searched for the show on Lost, they found Cliff instead of CBS because Cliff had been doing it for a while, and that's how he grew his audience, which he then turned into Podcast Answer Man and all other fun stuff. So
Hmm.
there are times when luck just has to be it's part of it and
Yeah.
timing. So yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Gary has a point, and I did hear this on he was being interviewed. Jon Stewart said I thought it was a shame Jon Stewart had to end his run on Apple TV because of his focus on China. Yeah, he
Mm.
basically left because they wouldn't let him say what he wanted to say, and so he's back on Comedy Central now on Monday nights doing the Daily Show, and I'll be interested to see
Well,
if he continues to do a podcast because
yeah.
he had a companion podcast to his
Yeah, I think he did actually launch I think he's the featured person on the Daily Show's podcast right now.
yeah
So I
yeah I
think
know.
they've already launched it. Yeah.
Excellent. So, well, Rob, what's coming up for you? Anything exciting?
I'm just trying to keep up with the content that I'm trying to produce. I've
Yeah.
got lots of shows that I've started, and I just need to keep up with it, and then also, help my clients that I'm working with, and keep doing stuff with Streamyard. I'm having a lot of fun with that. So that's the big thing that I'm doing.
Nice. Well, on the School of Podcasting, I've teased it for about 3 weeks now. Yes, I'm finally going to release the episode with Gary Arndt, who was featured in New and Noteworthy, which you can't do anything to get into. I actually reached out to Apple. I never got an answer, but everything I've researched, that's a human curated list.
It's always been that way.
Yeah, there's no algorithm or anything like that. And so Gary shares, did it do anything? Did it not do anything? I'm not going to tell you because you have to listen. Or you can go to schoolofpodcasting.com/follow and do that. Jim will be back next week, and you can always find Rob over at newmediashow.com, or just go to robgreenlee.com. All of his pertinent stuff is there on his website. Right. Rob, thanks for showing up today. Or
my YouTube channel, if you just
go.
want to go to youtube.com/@Rob Greenlee, and you can find all the video shows that I'm doing over there too.
There you go. Excellent. So thank you to the chat room. Thanks to Mark over at podcastbranding.co and Dan at basedonatruestorypodcast.com. And I've got another 7 seconds to kill. So I guess this is where we dance or something of that nature. But thanks to everyone for showing up. If you have a question, you can always go to askthepodcastcoach.com/ask, and we'll play it on a future episode. So thanks to everyone, and we'll see you again next week. Here we go with another episode of Ask the Podcast Coach. Likes, subscribe, ring the bell, that whole 9 yards.
Go watch Dave on the Podcast Hall of Fame video in YouTube.
That's it. We should have brought that up. Yeah. That's now complete with Adam Carolla at the end. I saw that last night. So yeah, check out the Hall of Fame video. So we'll see you next week, everybody.